Good afternoon. Joining us on the line now is Sally Stevens. She's had 60 plus years as a solo and choral singer, choral director and vocal contractor with the best people in Hollywood. She's worked as a singer on concert tours with Nat King Cole and Burt Bacharach as a featured soloist, and worked as a regular on shows such as the Danny Kaye Variety Show, the Carol Burnett Show, as well as the Elvis Presley 68 Comeback Special, The Love Boat and Happy Days. She's sung on the film scores of Dr. Zhivago, The Sound of Music, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Her memoir, I Sang That, talks of growing up and succeeding in the ever-evolving music business. Welcome to the show, Sally.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, it's so lovely to have you with us on the show. What an amazing life and career you've had.
Well, thank you. I've been very, very, very blessed. I know I have a lot to be grateful for because some fun adventures came along the way. And
I was interested to read that you failed your first audition for a singing job at the age of 16, and he told you to just retreat into marriage and motherhood rather than pursue a career as a singer.
Yes.
What did he know?
That was reflective of my confidence at the time too, probably. But it was pretty presumptuous of me to think that I even had a chance at that job. But I had to show up, you know.
So getting a reaction like that, it didn't put you off then?
Well, I think it did for a while. But, you know, I was still in high school and I was doing other things, and I was getting ready to. I was singing with a little band of guys from my high school, and you know I was still working at music, but not in the professional way that I eventually would.
So how did you then end up going on tour with Nat King Cole?
Well, that was kind of second in the big events. I was a student at UCLA, and a record producer in New York had produced with session singers, what they call just a pickup group, a doo-wop version of Over the Rainbow that suddenly took off and was a big record. And they had to have a group to be the Baysiders. So myself and three of my music colleague students at UCLA became the Baysiders, and we did some performances and stuff. We recorded some more songs, but I had an opportunity to audition first for Ray Conniff. And the first tour with the real community of singers in Hollywood that I did was the Ray Conniff tour. We did a West Coast 10-day tour, and then a 47 one-nighter bus and truck tour all across the country. And that's where I met my husband on the first tour, and we were married on the second tour. Oh. And we came back and worked in Vegas for a while, and then we had an opportunity again to audition for the Nat Cole road show that was just coming together. And so we did that, and we were both hired, and that was an amazing adventure too. This was the second to the last tour that Nat did before he passed away, and he had been diagnosed with cancer, but we thought that it was all under control. I was so saddened when he left us.
Yeah. And after that came Burt Bacharach as a featured soloist, and he's actually written a foreword for your book.
Yes, he did. And again, we just lost this amazing, iconic gentleman a few months ago. I had worked with Bert did his first concert tour as an artist. You know, he had written many, many hit songs for other artists. But when he first went out on the road as an artist himself, the concert was in a little just above San Diego somewhere. And I was singing backup for him. So that's the first time I met him. The singer Jackie Ward had put together a little group of four ladies. But then I was hired by Ron Hickland to work on the vocals for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And I think that's where I am more connected with Bert as a soloist. And then he offered me a job to go on the road, and I was delighted. It was a great time to do that. And it was a wonderful 10 years of fascinating adventure because I wouldn't have had it home.
Yeah, I bet. And what's it like being on the road? Because, you know, we kind of led to believe that it's really glamorous, but it's obviously really hard work and hard going from one place to another.
Well, you're right, Hannah. You know, the great example of that was the 47 one-nighter bus tour, because we'd get to a little town and check into a hotel and, you know, put our lipstick on and head over to the auditorium and do a concert, then go back to the hotel, and the next morning get back on the bus and go to the next town. But with Bert, it was much less stressful, because we stayed in a place for a week or two. We would do Las Vegas for 2 weeks, or Tahoe for 2 weeks. And then we began doing the East Coast summer tent circuit, which was a week in New Hampshire. A week in Massachusetts, a week in cities along the coast. And so it wasn't quite as frantic. We also did a tour to Australia, which was fascinating. And that was about a 2.5 week trip, but we were several days in each city. So it wasn't quite so stressful. But it's fun to perform live, and we always had wonderful concerts, and they were there to hear Bert, not us. So I never got terrible stage fright when I stepped out to do my solos, because it was Bert's music, and that's what they loved.
Yeah. And I have to ask about some of the other projects. The Elvis Presley 68 comeback special, that must have been amazing to be involved with.
Well, it was very fun. Actually, what we did for the special, and I found the show on public broadcast PBS recently and watched as much of it as I could. They didn't show the entire thing, but what we did was more pre-recording of the underscore vocals. So we weren't actually on the set with him when they did the shooting of the show. But I have a photograph of myself with Bert. With Elvis and the other 3 singers, and that's a treasure. That's a treasure.
Oh, yes. And what about other shows? I mentioned the Love Boat and Happy Days. What kind of things did you do with them?
We always did. I think we did the main title for Love Boat and Happy Days, but once in a while there would be an incidental cue of music, you know, within the show. At that time, most of the vocal work that I did was with Ron Hicklin, and Ron became so well known that we became the Ron Hicklin Singers. And we did. I don't know if you're familiar with the Wrecking Crew, Hannah. Do you know the documentary film called The Wrecking Crew?
Not sure. Don't think so. No, sorry.
It's about the musicians that did all the recording. They did jingles and radio programs and record sessions and film scoring. And the son of one of those musicians, did this wonderful documentary that as really a tribute to his father, but it included all the stuff that was going on in the 60s and 70s with these musicians. We, the singers, were standing right there next to them in the studios, but the focus of the film never touched the singers. So, but we were part of that wonderful, wonderful time in the business where there was a lot of union recording, and the artists were not groups that included the background vocals, you know, as they do sometimes. So we did backups for Frank Sinatra and Peggy Lee and all those folks. And we started to do a little work in film, which is what more developed for me along the way.
Yes, The Sound of Music. What were you doing with that?
Well, that was a session at RCA Records. It was, again, a pre-recorded off-camera session, but we were the voices of the singing nuns. How do you solve a problem like Maria?
Oh, fabulous. Amazing. Yeah. And something I didn't mention in the introduction, it's your voice on the main titles for Family Guy and The Simpsons. Tell us about that.
Well, the Family Guy was Seth's first production. As you know, he created that show, Seth MacFarlane, and we did the main title, and it was the main characters, and then the group vocals joined in about halfway through. And that show was canceled after the first year, but there was so much interest in following on it with YouTube and stuff that it was brought back on under contract, and it's been running ever since. And that main title plays, and we've done a lot of interesting music. The people of the village singing silly songs or and then the Simpsons main title was done 31 or 2 years ago now, when the first season went on, and that same main title has been playing all these years.
Isn't it amazing?
It really is. And when you do those things, I remember getting called for that session, and you have no idea, what is this, an animated show? How important could that be, and how long will that run? Well, we have no idea that those things can sometimes just turn into forever blessings. I mean, I get residuals for those main titles every season. So
wow.
It's very
amazing.
grateful.
It's the longest running animated show ever, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it was a wonderful show to work on. For most of that time, I think up until the 28th season, Alf Clausen was the composer. And I really feel like his music was very much the identity of the show. They did change music teams at that time. Excuse me. For a number of reasons, I think for financial reasons, and it continues to be a wonderful show. But they're playing the main title, but I'm not working so much on the live music that they do for each episode now.
And also, I wanted to ask you about the vocal contracting that you do. You've assembled choirs for many film composers, the likes of John Williams, Danny Elfman, Hans Zimmer. That must be so exciting.
It's very exciting, Hannah. It gives you a much closer connection to the project, and of course to the composers. It involves conversations beforehand of what the sound needs to be, and I've had some wonderful experiences with all of those composers. The project that I remember with most affection for Danny was Edward Scissorhands. And we had a group of women, I think it was 20 voice women's choir. And it was a very floaty, kind of magical, straight tone sound. And I've always enjoyed that session. But working with John Williams was amazing. And Alan Silvestri was another one of the early composers, and James Horner. I don't know how much time we have to talk about this, but working with John, he is the most gracious, well-respected, gifted, genius composer, I think, in the business. I think everyone agrees to that pretty much. And he was working on, the reason I got to do the first contracting job for him was I had worked on Power of One with Hans Zimmer, which was authentic African music. And John was about to score Amistad for Steven Spielberg, which was also involved authentic African music, but it had the undertone quality of John's music, which was, more classical. And so he was looking for a soloist to do one particular cue, which was a heartbreaking cue. One of the young women, the slaves on the ship, that was pregnant and loaded in chains, sitting on the edge of the bow. Or, you could see in her face that she was not into this ride. And she slowly, in slow motion, falls back into the waves with all those chains. And just, he had written a beautiful solo cue for that had to be the right emotional quality and the right ethnic quality, but it was leaned toward classical sound music. And we auditioned many people. I even auditioned some of the students at Juilliard while I was in New York for a meeting, but nothing was quite right. And then someone sent me a link to the new opera director for San Francisco Opera. And he told me about a young woman who was on the road at that time doing concerts. Her name was Pamela Dillard. And I spoke to her on the phone, and I could just tell from talking to her, sometimes you just sense that she was the right voice. She sent a demo, and John loved it. And he ended up writing 2 more solos for her within the film score. But, that's the depth to which sometimes you get involved with the project as a contractor.
Oh, it's amazing. And the music for these films can be so powerful, can't they? You talk about emotion, and it's true. You know, you can be watching a sad scene, but without the music, maybe you wouldn't cry. But with the music, it just adds that extra emotion. It's incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. It's so important. I was asked to speak once at a little music gathering in Phoenix, and a dear friend, composer William Ross, gave me a DVD to share with him. This is slightly different from the emotional, sad or happy music, but this was the scene from Psycho, where in the shower, if you recall,
Yes.
with the knife hammering into the lady, and without that, with violins, it doesn't really mean much.
No, exactly. And also, I know you serviced as choral director for the Oscars for 22 years. That's incredible.
That was another wonderful gift that, and the producer at the time was Michael Seligman, who was so kind. He actually gave me screen credit for that, which was unusual. And for many of the years, Bill Conti was the music director. But there were some very fun experiences with that. It was always exciting to be on set, sort of, you know, for preparations and the actual show itself, and to watch the celebrities walk through the aisles. And one night when we were working from the orchestra pit with Bill Conti, Madonna and her date for the evening, Michael Jackson, were sitting in the front row.
As you do. You must have met so many celebrities. Have you ever been fazed by any of them? Ever been starstruck?
I think for me, Frank Sinatra was the one that starstruck me.
Yeah. What were the circumstances?
Well, I only sang backup for him for some recordings, and always just observed him from the distance. But he would walk into the studio. I remember when he had just started to date Mia Farrow. When he and Mia Farrow and his entourage walked into United Studios, and the musicians and singers had been there already. We'd run the songs a time or two, so we were ready to record. And Frank would come in and sing the song once or twice through, and that was it. He was done. He didn't mess around. He knew what he was doing, and he did a perfect vocal the first time through. But I heard an interesting story about Frank that I always loved. There was a little restaurant in Palm Springs where he would sometimes drop in to sing. And the guys, there would be drunks in the audience sometimes who would confront him because he was a gorgeous guy, popular, handsome, wealthy, but he was kind of mafia connected. So everybody in those days, those guys were challenged. And they'd get aggressive with him. And one night, one of them did in Palm Springs, and he managed to take a swing at him, and he was settled down. But Frank later found out that this gentleman's wife at that time was in the hospital dying of cancer, and he paid all of the hospital bills.
Oh, wow.
We just don't hear stories like that about, certainly not about Frank. It's always controversial.
Yeah. Oh.
So
and you also you've written your own songs as well. And you wrote a song called Who Comes This Night that was recorded by James Taylor. How wonderful.
Oh my gosh, that was truly a bucket list event, Hannah. Actually, that song had originally been written for the movie Absence of Malice, and Dave Grusin was the composer. I did the lyrics. And it was just a source cue for the film. But many years later, I must have been about 10 years later, 12 years later, James did his first Christmas album. And Dave was involved as a producer. And he reached out to me. He said, Sally, do you think you could write a second verse to that song of ours? Because it was very short for the film. So I did. And we made a demo of it. And James loved it. And I was in tears the first time I heard his recording when I got the copy of the CD. But I was there in the session at Capitol because I had asked if I could come to do some photographs. And when I walked into the control booth, James was sitting there at the controls. He got up, came over, offered me his hand and said, "Hi, I'm James Taylor. You wrote a beautiful song. Can I get you some coffee?"
Oh, wow. How wonderful. What did you say?
I said, "I'm fine, thank you. Just thrilled to be here. I'll sit quietly over there."
Oh, fabulous.
He'd been my musical hero since the late 60s.
Yeah, amazing. And how did you find the process of writing this book? I Sang That is a great title.
Well, I'm speaking to you, as a matter of fact, right now from Iowa City, where the University of Iowa is, and the very iconic sort of writing workshops here at this university. They've done a series of summer writing workshops that were a festival sort of, and I've done that for the last 21 years. My writing is kind of my second passion. And along the way, I took memoir classes in poetry and fiction and essay and whatever. But the great time to get this together as a book was the pandemic, because there was not anything happening for the first year or so. Certainly there was no, activity as recording sessions and so forth. And I really had a chance to go through the materials I'd accumulated along the way, to add some, to expand some. And I had some very helpful input from one of the writers here, Gordon Menninga, that I've worked with often, and from a lovely writer up in Montana that I'd also done a workshop with, Laura Munson. So with their comments, and their reading of the manuscript, I finally got it through. And I think the publishers did a great job of getting it together, and the layout and the pictures and everything. I think it works pretty well.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us on the show. Sally Stevens, thank you so much for joining us. And if listeners want to get a copy of the book, it's available on our website, TRE.radio. It's called I Sang That. Sally, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Anna. It's also available on Amazon, by the way.
Yes, perfect.
And, a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much.